My wife cheated with her boss. Years later, I met his ex on a plane. I was 34 when I thought my life had finally made sense. I had a stable job in Seattle, a cozy little house, and a wife I thought I knew better than anyone. Her name was Linda. We'd been married for almost 8 years. She was smart, funny, and had this calm way of speaking that could turn any bad day around. I used to call her my peace. Funny how peace can become the storm that ruins everything. It all started one Friday evening. I came home early from work, something I rarely did. The rain was pouring outside, the kind of cold drizzle that only Seattle can deliver. I remember thinking how nice it'd be to surprise her with dinner and a movie night. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked outside. The lights in the living room were dim, and for some reason, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. I opened the front door quietly. There were voices upstairs, a man's voice and hers. At first, I thought maybe she'd invited someone from work. But then I heard her laugh, that soft, flirty laugh I hadn't heard in a long time. And then, silence, followed by sounds I can still hear when I close my eyes. I froze on the stairs, my hands were shaking, my throat dry as sand. I didn't need to see it, but I did. I walked up, one slow step at a time. When I opened the bedroom door, my world stopped. She was there, with him, her boss, Richard Campbell. A man I'd met at her company's Christmas party. A man who shook my hand and told me I was a lucky husband. He looked right at me, his face turning pale. Linda screamed, tried to cover herself, words spilling out that made no sense. "Tom, it's not what it looks like," she said, but it was exactly what it looked like. I remember standing there, numb, unable to move. It felt like watching someone else's life fall apart. Then I walked away, just like that, down the stairs, out the door, into the rain. I don't remember how long I stood outside, drenched, staring at the house we'd built together. That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, she called me dozens of times. I didn't answer. By Sunday, I packed a bag and left. She begged to talk, said it was a mistake, said she still loved me, but I couldn't unsee what I saw. The following weeks were a blur. I moved into a small rented apartment downtown. My appetite disappeared. Nights were long, filled with silence that screamed louder than any noise. I kept replaying everything, every lie, every "I love you," every late night she said she was working overtime. I realized the betrayal didn't start that night. It had been happening long before I found out. Richard tried to reach out once. He sent me an email saying he was sorry. I deleted it, but that man didn't stop there. A few months later, he used his position at the company to make things harder for me. He spread rumors that I was unstable, that I'd lost it after the divorce. It cost me clients and respect. Eventually, I quit my job. I couldn't stay in the same city where every corner reminded me of her. I needed a new start. So, I sold what little I had left and booked a flight to Austin, Texas. I didn't know anyone there, but sometimes starting over means knowing no one. The morning of my flight, I remember sitting in the airport, watching planes take off, thinking how easy it must be for them to just leave everything behind. My chest still hurt every time I thought of Linda. It had been nearly a year since that night, but some wounds don't close just because time passes. When they called my boarding group, I took a deep breath and got on the plane. It was a small Boeing, maybe 100 seats total. I found my seat by the window. I always liked looking out at the clouds. It made me feel like maybe life had something more waiting somewhere else. A few minutes later, a woman sat down next to me. She looked to be in her early 30s, with chestnut hair and tired eyes that somehow still shone with grace. She smiled politely and said, "Looks like we'll be seat neighbors for the next few hours." I nodded, returning a faint smile. "Yeah, guess so." Her name was Emily. We started with small talk, weather, travel, work. She said she was leaving Seattle for good too. Something in her voice told me she was running from something, just like me. "Fresh start?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Something like that." We both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that hides a wound. At some point, the plane hit a bit of turbulence, and she grabbed the armrest. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I hate flying." "Don't worry," I said. "I hate what happens before the flight even more," she chuckled. "Like what?" "Leaving everything behind," I replied. Her eyes softened. Yeah, I know that feeling. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two broken strangers in the sky. Then she told me she'd recently gone through a messy divorce. Her husband had cheated on her with one of his employees. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated before asking, "What? What was his name?" "Richard," she said quietly. "Richard Campbell." The world went silent for a moment. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. I turned to look at her fully. "Did you say Richard Campbell?" She nodded. "Yeah, you know him." I leaned back, staring at the seat in front of me. 1,000 memories flooded in. My wife, that night, the betrayal, the pain. Then, slowly, I said, "Yeah, I knew him." She looked at me, puzzled. "How?" I took a deep breath. "My wife cheated on me," I said, "with her boss. His name was Richard Campbell." Her eyes widened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." I nodded, still in disbelief. Two people, broken by the same man, sitting side by side, thousands of feet above the ground. Fate has a strange sense of humor. We spent the rest of the flight talking. Not about him, not about them, but about what we'd lost and what we'd learned. She told me she'd taken him to court and won half of his company and properties. She said it wasn't about money, it was about closure. "Sometimes," she said, "you have to take something back from the people who stole your peace." I told her how I'd lost almost everything, but somehow, hearing her speak made it feel less like a loss. It felt like maybe I'd been meant to lose those things, to find something else. When the plane started descending, neither of us wanted the conversation to end. She smiled softly. "You know, I wasn't planning to talk to anyone today." "Me neither," I said. Guess fate had other plans. When we landed, we exchanged numbers. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't the last time we'd talk. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something new, hope. That night, in my small Austin motel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her. Emily, her calm voice, the way her eyes softened when she smiled. It had been so long since I'd felt a real connection with anyone. I'd buried that part of myself after Linda, but with Emily, it felt different. Like two broken pieces that somehow fit. The next morning, I sent her a message, "Coffee." She replied a few minutes later, "Only if you promise not to talk about Richard." I laughed out loud for the first time in a year. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. Austin was warm, sunny, so different from the gray Seattle I'd left behind. She wore a white dress and sunglasses, and when she smiled, it felt like the sun got brighter. We talked for hours. About life, betrayal, and what it means to start over. She told me she used to believe in perfect marriages. Now she believed in honest ones. I told her I used to think love was about comfort. Now I thought it was about courage. "Courage?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "To love again after being broken." Her eyes met mine. "Then I guess we're both brave." We started seeing each other often after that. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks by the river. And those walks turned into something neither of us expected: peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the past. Instead, I was grateful for it, because it had led me to her. Life has a strange way of making sense, but only when you stop fighting it. By the time fall arrived, Emily and I had become inseparable. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, she said softly, "You ever think we were meant to meet?" I smiled. Every day, and I meant it. Because sometimes the universe breaks you just enough to open your heart again. The months that followed felt like waking up after a long winter. I'd forgotten what it was like to smile for no reason. Emily had that effect on me. She brought warmth wherever she went. We spent our weekends exploring Austin, the music, the food, the endless sunshine. Sometimes we didn't even talk much. Just being together was enough. I remember one evening at Zilker Park. We sat on a blanket, listening to a street musician play an old blues song. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Feels like we've known each other forever." I smiled and said, "Maybe we met in another life." She laughed softly. "Then I'm glad we met again in this one." Life was quiet, simple, and for the first time in a long while, that was all I needed. But peace never comes without its tests. One afternoon, I received an email from an old coworker back in Seattle. He wrote, "Thought you should know. Richard's company is in trouble. His ex took half the business. He's been bad-mouthing you again. I stared at the screen for a while, then closed the laptop. The old me would have been furious, but this time, I just felt nothing. Richard no longer had power over me. Still, I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want to reopen wounds that had barely healed. A few days later, we went to a local diner for breakfast. We ordered pancakes and coffee, and for a moment, it felt like we were just two ordinary people with ordinary problems. Then Emily's phone buzzed. Her expression changed. She excused herself, walked outside to take the call. I could see her pacing through the window. When she returned, her eyes looked distant. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "That was Richard." My chest tightened. "What did he want?" "He wants to meet. Says he wants to apologize properly." I clenched my jaw. "And you?" she sighed. "I don't owe him anything, but maybe I need to hear it to finally let it go." I understood. Closure isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself. So I told her, "If you want to go, I'll be right there with you." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Tom." The next day, we met him at a hotel lobby. It was strange seeing the man who destroyed both our lives. He looked older, heavier, exhausted, like the years had finally caught up to him. Emily stood tall, graceful as ever. He started speaking, fumbling through his words. "Emily, Tom, I know I hurt you both. I lost everything. My company, my marriage, my reputation. I didn't say a word." He continued, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Emily's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "I forgave you a long time ago, Richard. But I'll never forget." Then she turned to me and said quietly, "Let's go." As we walked out, I realized something profound. Revenge fades, but peace stays. We drove home in silence, the air thick with emotions. When we pulled into the driveway, she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for being there. Always," I replied. That night, she cried in my arms for the first time. Tears not of sadness, but of release. Sometimes you don't realize how heavy your pain is until someone helps you carry it. Weeks passed. Life became lighter. We started making plans, small ones at first, fixing up my little house. Starting a small design business together. Her idea. "Let's build something that's ours," she said. It felt right. We weren't just rebuilding our lives. We were creating something new from the ashes. One evening, as we painted the living room walls, she looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think love was supposed to be perfect." I smiled. "And now I think love is supposed to be real." Those words stayed with me. Because real love isn't about avoiding pain, it's about healing through it. Months turned into a year. Our little business grew slowly, and we found comfort in simple things: morning coffee, quiet dinners, long drives. But sometimes, I'd still wake up at night, haunted by memories. Not of Linda, but of the man I used to be, the one who believed life ended when love betrayed him. One morning, as I sat on the porch watching the sunrise, Emily joined me with 2 cups of coffee. "Bad dreams again?" she asked. I nodded. "They come and go." She handed me the mug and said, "Then let them go." Her calm voice always had a way of grounding me. "Do you ever think," I asked, "that all of this, the pain, the betrayal, was supposed to happen?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe. Sometimes you need to lose what you thought was everything to find what actually matters." I smiled. "And what matters?" She looked at me with a soft grin. "This, right now." And just like that, the past didn't matter anymore. The next summer, we took a trip back to Seattle. It was Emily's idea. She said she wanted to face the city that once broke us. The moment we landed, memories flooded back. The rain, the gray skies, the house I'd left behind. We drove past it once. Someone else lived there now. A family, with kids playing in the yard. I watched for a while, then smiled. That house didn't hold me anymore. On our last night in the city, we sat by the waterfront, the same place I used to walk alone after the divorce. Now, I wasn't alone. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of us," she whispered. "Why?" "Because we didn't let the worst part of our lives define the rest of it." I kissed her forehead and said, "No, we let it guide us to each other." When we flew back to Texas, I looked out the window at the clouds, just like that first flight. Except this time, I wasn't escaping anything. I was going home. A year later, on a quiet spring morning, I asked Emily to marry me. We were walking by the lake, the air warm, the sky painted gold. I stopped, turned to her, and said, "We met because of someone else's lies. But everything real between us came from truth." She smiled through tears. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." Then I asked, "So will you marry me?" She laughed and said, "Yes, but only if you promise not to bring Richard to the wedding." We both burst out laughing. That laughter, it healed something deep inside me. We got married under a big oak tree, with just a few friends around. No fancy suits, no big speeches, just love. When the vows were said, she whispered, "Thank you for finding me." And I whispered back, "Thank you for saving me." Years later, when people ask how we met, I always smile before answering. Because the truth sounds almost like fiction. But it's real, painfully, beautifully real. She cheated with her boss, he lost everything. And then, fate sat two broken souls next to each other on a plane. Sometimes life isn't about happy endings, it's about second chances. And if you're lucky, they find you when you least expect them. Even now, decades later, when I sit by the fire and tell this story to my grandchildren, I always end it the same way: don't hate the people who break you. They're just the hands that shape who you become, because if it weren't for that betrayal, I'd have never met the love of my life. And I'd have never learned that even the worst pain can lead to something extraordinary. Fate doesn't make mistakes, it just takes its time. It's been more than 30 years since that flight to Texas. Sometimes, it feels like yesterday. Sometimes, it feels like it happened to someone else entirely. I'm 70 now. My hands tremble a little when I hold my coffee, and my hairs turn the color of winter clouds. But my heart is at peace. I sit on the porch most mornings, watching the sun rise over the lake behind our house. The same lake where I proposed to Emily. She still sits beside me, every morning, with her cup of tea and that same soft smile. We've built a life together, simple, imperfect, but ours. Our children are grown now, with families of their own. They sometimes ask how we met, and we always laugh before telling them the story. They never believe it at first. On a plane, they say because of an affair, and I always tell them, yes, but that's not the real story. The real story is how two broken people refuse to let pain define them. I used to think betrayal was the end of everything. Now I know it's only the end of what was false. Life doesn't destroy what's real, it reveals it. When Linda cheated, I thought my world was over. I thought love was dead, but love isn't fragile, it's patient. It waits for you to heal, and then it finds you again, when you least expect it. I learned that the hard way. I remember, years ago, Linda reached out to me. She wrote a letter, said she was sorry. Said she'd made mistakes, that she hoped I was happy. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I'd already forgiven her long ago. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life. It's about freeing yourself from the chain that keeps you in the past. I burned that letter one quiet evening, watched the flames turn paper into ash. And I felt light again. Emily held my hand that night. She didn't need to ask what the letter said. She just whispered, "You can let it go now." And I did. It is strange. Sometimes I wonder how life might have gone if none of that had happened. If Linda had stayed faithful, if Richard hadn't crossed that line. But then I look at Emily, at our home, our kids, our laughter, and I know I wouldn't change a thing. Some storms don't come to destroy you, they come to clear your path. I think about that often when I tell this story. Because everyone faces their own storm sooner or later. And when it hits, you'll think it's the end, but it's not. It's just life showing you what truly matters. Emily says, I become philosophical in my old age. Maybe she's right. Maybe it comes from all the quiet mornings and all the memories that live in them. When I look at her now, I don't see the woman who once shared my pain, I see the woman who turned it into love. Time has softened everything. The anger, the fear, the sadness, all that's left is gratitude. Gratitude that I lived long enough to understand that everything, even heartbreak, has meaning. The world looks different when you've made peace with your past. You stop asking why me, and start saying thank you. One evening, not long ago, our granddaughter asked me, "Grandpa, how do you know when you found the right person?" I smiled and told her, "You don't find them, life does." Usually after it's broken you enough to recognize what's real. She didn't understand then, but someday she will. Because that's the thing about love. You can't plan it, you can't force it, and you sure can't predict it. It just happens, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Like an airplane seat beside a stranger who turns out to be the missing piece of your story. I often think about that flight. Two broken hearts, both running away from the same man, sitting side by side among the clouds. You can call it coincidence, I call it grace. Because grace is what turns pain into purpose. And that's what Emily and I found, purpose. We used to run a small art studio downtown after we retired. We teach painting to kids and old folks alike. One day, a man came in, gray hair, tired eyes. It took me a moment to recognize him. It was Richard. He looked frail, humbled. He told me he'd lost almost everything, that he was living quietly now. He asked if I hated him. I said no. He looked surprised. I told him, "You were the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best. Because without you, I'd have never found her." He didn't know what to say, he just nodded, eyes wet, and walked away. I never saw him again, but I hoped he found peace too, because in the end, we all deserve that, even the ones who hurt us. Pain is a teacher, maybe the hardest one, but also the most honest. And if you listen closely, it teaches you what love really is, not possession, not perfection. Just kindness, understanding, and choosing to stay even when life gets hard. That's what Emily did for me. And that's what I try to do for her, even now, as our hair turns white and our steps grow slow. Every night before bed, she still says, "Good night, Tom, I love you." And I always whisper back, "I love you more," because I do. More with every year that passes, more with every memory that fades. More because time taught me that love is not about forever, it's about now, and right now, I am happy. Truly, quietly happy. Sometimes I look up at the sky and think about all the flights crossing above us. Maybe, up there somewhere, two other souls are finding each other. To people who think their lives are over, but they're just beginning. And maybe one day, they'll sit on their porch too, gray-haired and smiling, telling their grandchildren how they met. And maybe they'll end their story the same way I always end mine. Life is funny. You think it breaks you, but really, it's just turning you toward what you were meant to find. Then I pause, take Emily's hand, and say, "And if you're lucky, what you find stays." Now, as I sit here, the sun dipping behind the trees, I realize something simple yet profound. Love isn't something you find and keep. It's something you build every single day with patience, forgiveness, and faith. There were days I doubted it, days I thought the pain would never end. But it did, and what replaced it was something deeper, peace. Peace that comes from knowing everything happened exactly as it should have. Sometimes I still dream of that rainy night in Seattle. I see the man I was, lost, angry, broken. And I wish I could tell him what I know now. I'd tell him, don't give up. The pain you feel will one day make sense. I'd tell him that the love he thought he lost wasn't gone. It was just waiting to find the right home. I'd tell him that one day he'll sit beside the most beautiful soul he has ever known, and he'll thank the universe for breaking him just enough to let her in. That's what life is, a series of goodbyes leading to the right hello. And if this story means anything, it's that endings are just beginnings in disguise. So wherever you are, whoever you've lost, whatever pain you carry, hold on, because life is still writing your story, and maybe, just maybe, your best chapter hasn't even begun yet. When you grow old, memories become your most loyal friends. They visit you quietly, without knocking, and sit beside you when the world falls silent. Some bring smiles, some bring tears, but they all remind you that you truly lived. Now that I've lived most of my years, I realize life isn't about the days that went perfectly. It's about the days you survived when you thought you couldn't. Those are the days that shape who you are. If I could speak to my younger self, the one sitting in that car outside the house, drenched in rain and heartbreak, I'd tell him, this pain will pass, but what it teaches you will stay, because everything that hurts also heals. And sometimes, it heals you by changing who you are. I've learned that the heart doesn't break to destroy you. It breaks to make room for something better. When you lose someone you love, you don't lose love itself, you just learn to give it differently. When Emily and I got older, we talked a lot about the meaning of it all. We agreed that love isn't about finding someone who never hurts you. It's about finding someone who helps you heal when they do. It took me half a lifetime to understand that. Now, when my grandchildren ask for advice, I tell them this: be kind, even when it's hard. Forgive, even when they don't deserve it. Love, even when you're afraid. Because everything good in life begins after fear. Fear was what kept me stuck for so long. Fear of starting over, fear of being alone, fear of trusting again. But once I faced it, life opened like a door I didn't know was there. And on the other side was Emily. That's the funny thing about fate. It doesn't rush, it waits for you to be ready. Sometimes, it has to break your heart to prepare it for what's coming. When you're young, you think love is about fireworks, passion, excitement, the thrill of being wanted. But when you've lived long enough, you learn that real love is quieter. It's in the way someone remembers your coffee order. It's in the way they listen when you talk about the same story for the 100th time. It's in the silence between words, the comfort of just being. That's what Emily gave me. Not drama, not chaos, just peace. And peace, I've learned, is the most beautiful form of love. There's something else I tell my grandkids. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. But also, believe that you're strong enough to move on, because holding on to pain doesn't punish the one who hurt you. It only stops you from living. Letting go is not weakness, it's wisdom. I remember the day I truly forgave Linda. It wasn't the day I burned her letter. It was years later, when I realized I could think of her and feel nothing but gratitude. She was the lesson I didn't know I needed. Without her betrayal, I would never have learned what love really is. Life is full of people who come to teach us something. Some teach us joy, some teach us pain, but every one of them leaves us wiser. Emily often says that every heartbreak is like pruning a tree. It hurts, but it helps you grow stronger. She's right, we both lost everything once, and yet here we are, surrounded by love we built from scratch. I think about that often when I sit here on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. Time moves slower now, but I'm in no hurry. Because when you've made peace with your past, every day feels like a gift. The world has changed so much since the days of that flight. Phones, computers, everything faster, louder, shorter. But one thing hasn't changed: the human heart. It still breaks the same way. And it still heals the same way, through love, forgiveness, and hope. Hope, that's the one thing you must never lose. Even in your darkest night, hold on to it like a candle. Because the smallest light is enough to guide you home. If my story means anything at all, I hope it reminds someone out there that no pain lasts forever. That sometimes, what feels like the end is just life clearing the way for something beautiful. You may think you've lost everything, but as long as you can still love, you haven't lost a thing. Love will always find a way, even if it has to cross an ocean. Even if it has to sit you next to a stranger on a plane. Sometimes I still dream about that flight. Not the pain that led to it, but the peace that followed. I dream of the moment I turned to Emily and saw the same kind of sorrow in her eyes that lived in mine. And how, somehow, that shared sorrow turned into love. It's strange how two people can be broken in all the same places, and when they meet, the cracks align, and suddenly, they fit. That's what we were, two broken souls who finally made sense together. Now, when I tell this story to others, they often ask, was it destiny? And I always say, no. It was choice, because fate may bring you together, but love is the choice you make every day after that. And every day since that flight, I've chosen her. Even on the hard days, even on the quiet days. Especially on the quiet days. Because love isn't just what happens in the big moments, it's what happens in the ordinary ones. In every sunrise, in every shared laugh, in every gentle good night. That's the secret, I think, to a happy life. Not chasing perfection, but cherishing presence. The people who hurt you teach you about strength. The people who love you teach you about grace. And the person you become through both, that's your gift to the world. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, remember this: your story isn't over. Even if you've been broken, even if you've lost everything, maybe life is just preparing you for someone who will look at your scars and see beauty. That's what Emily did for me. And that's what love really is, seeing the beauty in someone's scars and calling it home. So love deeply, forgive quickly, and never stop believing in second chances. Because sometimes the second chance is the real beginning. And when my time finally comes, when I take my last breath and close my eyes, I know exactly what I see. That plane, high above the clouds, a man lost in his pain. A woman sitting beside him, lost in hers. And then, a smile, the first smile in months. The moment everything changed, the moment hope returned. And maybe, just maybe, when I open my eyes again, wherever that may be, she lines be there beside me, like she always has been. Because some loves don't end, they just continue, somewhere else. That's what I believe, that's what I've lived. And that's the story I'll leave behind. My story isn't about betrayal, it's about grace. It's about how even the darkest moment can lead to the light. So if you take anything from it, let it be this: never curse the storm that changes your life. It might just be the wind that carries you to where you're meant to be. And when you get there, when you finally find your peace, don't forget to look back and whisper a quiet thank you. Because that's what makes life beautiful. Not the way it goes, but the way it ends, with love, forgiveness, and peace. I'll leave you with the words Emily told me on our 50th anniversary, as we danced slowly in our living room, surrounded by children, laughter, and time. She said, "If I had to live it all over again, the pain, the heartbreak, the tears, I would, just to find you." And I told her, so would I. Then we just held each other, and the world disappeared. And in that silence, I finally understood that every ending, no matter how painful, hides a beginning worth waiting for. I never imagined I'd live long enough to grow old beside someone I truly loved, but Emily and I did. For more than 40 years, we shared a life filled with laughter, forgiveness, and quiet moments that mattered more than any grand adventure. We built our home in Austin, Texas, a warm, peaceful place with wide porches and endless sunsets. She filled it with flowers, I filled it with books. And together, we filled it with memories. Every Sunday, we'd sit on that porch, holding hands, listening to the cicadas hum as the light faded. We didn't need to talk much. Silence between two people who understand each other can be the most beautiful language. Emily used to say, "The world is loud, but love is quiet." She was right. When I think about the happiest moments of my life, they weren't loud or dramatic. They were soft, her laughter in the kitchen, the way she'd fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, the smell of her favorite tea. Those were the treasures that time could never take away. We watched our children grow, our grandchildren arrive, and our hair turn silver. And through it all, the love that began on that plane only deepened. It wasn't perfect, no love ever is, but it was real. And real love is all a man can hope for in this world. Then one winter morning, everything changed. Emily had been sick for a while. She didn't like to talk about it. She said she didn't want to spend what time she had left worrying about what couldn't be changed. She wanted to live, fully, gently, beautifully, until her last breath. And she did. The night before she passed, she asked me to sit beside her. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were still as bright as the day we met. She said, "Promise me you'll keep living, even after I'm gone. Don't let my absence become your prison." I held her hand and said, "How could I live without you?" She smiled and whispered, "You'll learn. You always do." Then she closed her eyes, and the room fell silent. It felt like the world had stopped breathing. I sat there for a long time, holding her hand, unwilling to let go. The woman who healed my heart was gone, and I was once again a man learning to breathe through the ache. Grief has a strange way of wrapping itself around you. At first, it feels like it will crush you, but slowly, with time, it becomes part of you, not as pain, but as presence. Because when you love someone deeply, they never really leave. They live in the spaces between your thoughts, in the songs you hum without realizing, in the warmth that brushes your shoulder when you're alone. I still talk to her sometimes, out loud, on the porch, at night, when the stars are out and the world feels close enough to touch. I tell her about the kids, about the garden, about how I miss her laugh. And sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees just right, I swear I can hear her whisper back. People think grief fades. It doesn't. It changes shape. It stops being a wound and becomes a scar, something you carry, something that reminds you of how deeply you loved. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Some nights, I still dream of that flight. Not the pain before it, not the heartbreak that led me there, But the way her eyes looked when we realized we were talking about the same man, the same betrayal, and somehow found comfort in that shared pain. It's strange, isn't it? How two people can be broken by the same person and yet build something whole from those pieces. That's what Emily and I did. We built something whole. Even death can't take that away. Now, I spend my days quietly. I tend to the flowers she loved, sunflowers, mostly. I read her favorite books aloud to the empty room. And when I see couples walking hand in hand, I smile. Because once, I had that too, and that's more than most people get in a lifetime. If I've learned anything, it's that love doesn't end, it just changes form. When we're gone, it becomes the light in someone else's heart. It becomes the story they tell, and that's what I'm doing now, keeping our story alive. Not because it's sad, but because it's proof. Proof that even in the darkest moments, life has a plan. Proof that endings can be beginnings. Proof that love, real love, outlives us all. Sometimes I wonder what people think when they hear this story. Do they focus on the betrayal, or do they hear the redemption? Because to me, it was never about what Linda did, it was about what I found because of it. Pain was just the door I had to walk through, and on the other side was grace. I think about that word a lot these days, grace. It means learning to be gentle with yourself, even when life isn't. It means forgiving the past for not being different. It means understanding that every ending carries the seed of something new. That's what Emily taught me, that love isn't just what happens between two people. It's what remains after one of them is gone. So when my time comes, I won't be afraid, because I know she'll be waiting. And maybe we'll sit together again, not on a plane this time, but somewhere above the clouds. And I'll turn to her and say, "It's me again," and she smile and say, "Took you long enough," and we'll laugh the way we always did. And that will be enough. Until that day comes, I'll keep living. I'll keep loving, and I'll keep telling our story. Because someone, somewhere, needs to hear it. Someone who thinks their life is over after being betrayed. Someone who believes they'll never heal. Someone sitting alone right now, thinking they'll never love again. To that person, I say this: you will love again. You will laugh again. You will find peace again. I did. And if I could, after all that pain, so can you. Don't give up before life shows you why it hurt you, because one day, you'll look back, and it'll all make sense. You'll see how every heartbreak led you to where you were meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, you'll meet someone on a plane, and everything will change. That's how it happened for me. That's how I found love again. And that's how I learned that sometimes, destiny has the most unexpected sense of humor. So, thank you, life, for the heartbreak, for the lessons, for the love. For letting me live long enough to see that everything, even pain, has a purpose. If my story ends tonight, I'd be content. Because I've lived, I've loved, and I've forgiven. And that, my friends, is more than enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, the sun is setting. And I think I can hear her calling me again, softly, from somewhere beyond the light. Maybe it's time for one last flight, but this time, I won't be alone.